I did speak in this hall.
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
We had a good evening.
We did.
I wanted to meet you.
Thank you.
Release it up, don't it?
Ladies and gentlemen, without any more ado, Nigel Farage.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me without the microphone? Yes. Good. Good. I've developed this loud speaking voice in the European Parliament because, of course, when I stand up to speak, I've got about sort of 400 people heckling me the whole time. So, and I'm used to the President of the Parliament now cutting off my microphone, so I really don't need one. I suspect that on May the 6th this year, when I crawled out of the wreckage of that ghastly aeroplane accident, with only one thing on my mind: where was the next cigarette coming from? I guess there were many in Brussels and in Strasbourg and in Luxembourg who were less than happy that I'd survived the ordeal. And I thought perhaps what I'd do this evening is explain to you how that extraordinary situation came to pass, and perhaps what some of my motivations behind doing what I've done over the last 17 years are. You see, it wasn't supposed to be like this. I had been a member of the Conservative Party, but I'd never been an active member. I'd never stood for the local council. I had no ambitions to be involved in politics whatsoever. This, of course, does not mean that I didn't have views. Views which I honed from the age of 16 in public houses all through London and the home counties. But I never intended to be involved in politics in any way at all. And for me, the great moment came in 1990, October 1990, and I was working in the City of London, working on the London Metal Exchange. We used to work very hard in the mornings, and then lunch used to happen, and the afternoon performance was variable, to say the least. But this was one of those days, a quiet day on the markets, and it was about 5 o'clock, and we were in the usual bar on Old Broad Street, and one of the juniors ran in and said, because in those days, you know, mobile phones were in their infancy. A gentleman's bar in the City of London in those days would not have had a screen up on the wall giving, you know, live news or rugby coverage or whatever it might be. And one of the juniors ran in and said, "Britain has just joined the exchange rate mechanism." Now, my response to that, I'm not going to repeat in front of a family audience, but suffice to say, I was mortified that Mrs. Thatcher had given in and had decided that we should peg sterling against the Deutschmark as a precursor of going into a single European currency. And I remember being absolutely horrified at the sheer stupidity of it. And I say that because I was dealing in commodities, I was dealing in currencies, and the one thing I knew for certain is that when governments try to fix or decide what market levels should be, they every single time throughout human history and into the future, ladies and gentlemen, get it wrong. So I was damned angry about us joining the exchange rate mechanism, and of course it was a sign that Thatcher was on the way out, because within 4 weeks she was booted out by her own party. Well, anyway, the next morning, travelling up from Kent on the train, looking through the newspaper, I suddenly realised that it wasn't just the Conservative government that had taken us into the exchange rate mechanism, but it was supported by the Labour Party and it was supported by the Liberal Party. And it was the first time in my life I thought, hang on, I haven't got a choice. There's nothing I can do. All three parties are committed to signing us up to something that I think is going to be a disaster. And be encouraged, ladies and gentlemen, that the view that we have, the view that I just espoused, about how we should trade with Europe, be friendly with Europe, but not be part of a political union, when we started this party back in 1993, that was a minority opinion. It is now a clear, settled majority opinion amongst the people of this country. And none of that would have happened if it hadn't been for UKIP. And none of that would have happened if it hadn't been for the hard work of our members and supporters electing people like me back in 1999 and giving me and others the ability to be mouthpieces through the media for this cause. We have come a very, very long way. That is not to say that I'm complacent, and if I thought all the way back 20 years ago in that bar in Old Broad Street that getting too closely linked to this European project would be bad for us, well, I feel that ever more strongly today than I did then, and all I can promise you personally is that I will go on fighting and battling in whatever capacity I can, because I'll be damned if my 4 children are not going to grow up in a country that they can call their own. Thank you.
Here's a nice question from Michael Chapness. Norris McWhirter wrote a book about the EU, said the EU is fascist. And yet in more recent times, we find the EU Commission, in many cases, is communist. Where does the truth lie?
Right. Good question. It's been puzzling me for years whether this was a right-wing organisation we're dealing with or a left-wing organisation. Dear old Norris McWhirter, and I'll come back to him, Chairman, if I may, in a moment, dear old Norris was convinced that it was sort of a recreation of everything the Nazis had done, and yet dear old Vladimir Bukovsky, the former Soviet dissident who came to Britain in the 1970s and is now not only a member but a patron of our party, says that everything he sees with the European Commission reminds him of the old Politburo and centralised demand management government. I have no idea whether what we're witnessing is right-wing extremism or left-wing extremism. But what I do know is that it is statism. It is the idea that the people in charge know what is best for you, the peasantry, and that you should not have a right to determine your own future because you're simply not intelligent enough and it can be done for you. And so whether it's right-wing or left-wing, it's monstrous. But can I digress for a moment, please? I want to say something about Norris McWhirter. Norris, because I first knew him on the kids' TV programme Record Breakers. And there was Norris and Ross McWhirter, and then of course suddenly Ross McWhirter wasn't there because the IRA had murdered him. And I'd never understood the bond that existed between identical twins until I met Norris. Because through the 1990s, Norris was an absolutely tireless campaigner for UKIP and for me personally. Always said to me, Nigel, anything you're doing, I'll be with you, I'll support you. And we spoke at several dozen meetings together across the southeast, and there wasn't a single occasion when I was with Norris and had coffee with him or a drink with him or dinner with him when he didn't talk about his brother. And I thought, sort of nearly 30 years after he'd been killed, it just showed you this remarkable bond that exists. It was a very sad thing to witness. Anyway, one day, in 1999, in the run-up to those elections in which we succeeded, a very excited Norris rang me to say, now look, you and I are doing this meeting in Chichester, in the Assembly room. I said, yes, Norris, we are. Is there a problem? He said, no, far from it. He said, Patrick Moore, my old mate, has agreed that he will come and speak on the platform and speak for you in the European elections. Well, I thought, wow. Here is the greatest eccentric Englishman alive who has agreed to come and speak for me. And in those days, we had no celebrity support at all. This was really big stuff for UKIP at the time. Well, the great day came, and you'd never seen an audience like it. It was the week before the European elections. There were hundreds packed into these Chichester Assembly rooms. The local BBC, ITV, they'd all come, to see this great event. And I was terribly excited, very, very nervous too, but terribly excited about the whole thing. And anyway, it got to 7:25, and I said to one of the organisers, where's Patrick Moore? I don't know. I said, well, bloody well, ring him, find out. Oh, said Patrick, I thought it was tomorrow. So we had a full-scale disaster on our hands. We agreed to send a car down to Chelsea to get him, and the meeting started more or less on time. I said, look, Norris, try and string it out a bit because we're in a bit of trouble here. And Norris, like me, Norris never spoke with notes. always got up and did his thing, and Norris spoke beautifully on that evening for 12 minutes and sat down. I couldn't believe it. I've never been let down by Norris before, but my goodness me, well, I spoke for nearly 50 minutes. Goodness only knows what nonsense I was giving the audience. But I just about managed to hold their attention, and then, at the back of the room, there appeared this giant figure who could cause an eclipse himself. And Patrick began to make a stately sort of procession down the middle of the assembly rooms in Chichester. Of course, they all ignored everything I was saying, and everybody stood up and cheered, and he got to the front, and we had to help him up on... He's absolutely enormous, about sort of 24 stone. Very, very big man. And he had to be helped up onto the platform, and he said hello to Norris and the chairman, who he knew. I'd never met him, and we said hello, how he said how thrilled he was to be here. Sorry he was an hour late. And the chairman said, well, now, ladies and gentlemen, the man that you've all really come to hear this evening. And Patrick took the podium. In went the monocle. And this is how he started. During the war, I flew 43 missions with Bomber Command as a navigator on Lancasters. I hated the French and Germans then and still do. I mean, if I could at that moment have asked for the ground to open up and swallow me, this was, I thought, UKIP's first celebrity disaster. He said, not, of course, that that's got anything to do with it. I just feel better for saying it. And then proceeded to make the most incredible 25-minute talk along the same lines that I've given you tonight. That actually the beauty of Europe is its diversity, is the fact we have different countries, and what we don't want is to lose our identities. And he was wonderful. And I'm pleased to say, again, thanks to Norris, that I spoke to Patrick last week. And he's now, I'm afraid, wheelchair-bound. And probably not all that long for this world, given the condition that he's in. But we're very, very proud and pleased to have had people like Norris McWhirter and Patrick Moore supporting us for the last 10 or 15 years.
Good story, isn't it? It has been an audience with Nigel Farage, and I think Nigel has been spectacular, but so have you. You have been an excellent audience. Thank you very much indeed. A round of applause for yourself.